The morning air was crisp with autumn's first whisper as Nurse Valerie Bennett hurried through the sliding doors of Pine Ridge Medical Center. Her auburn hair was tucked neatly beneath her cap, hiding evidence of another sleepless night spent reviewing patient charts and medical journals. The hospital corridors hummed with the quiet efficiency that marked the transition between night and day shifts. Valerie moved with practiced grace, her soft-soled shoes barely making a sound on the polished floors, as she navigated toward the nephrology department where she had worked for the past 4 years. Her colleagues often joked that Valerie had been born with a stethoscope in hand, so natural was her talent for nursing. What they didn't know was that behind her gentle smile lay a determination forged by personal tragedy. Her father's death from kidney failure when she was just 16 had shaped her career path with unwavering purpose. Dr. Patel approached with a tablet in hand, his usually calm demeanor replaced by an urgent intensity. "Valerie, we have a high-priority case coming in. Male, mid-40s, acute renal failure," he said, swiping through digital charts with practiced efficiency. "His condition is deteriorating rapidly, and we need to prepare for emergency dialysis." The patient arrived surrounded by an unusual entourage, men in dark suits with earpieces, who positioned themselves strategically throughout the ward. Their presence created ripples of whispered speculation among the staff, but Valerie focused solely on the pale figure being transferred to the hospital bed. Frank Castellini lay unconscious, his powerful frame diminished by illness, his breathing shallow and labored. Despite the expensive suit now replaced by a hospital gown, an aura of authority clung to him like a second skin, evident even in his weakened state. Valerie's trained eyes assessed him clinically, noting the yellowish tinge to his skin, the swollen ankles, and the evidence of previous surgeries across his torso. Behind her professional detachment, something about the profound loneliness emanating from this man touched a chord of recognition within her. As days passed, Valerie found herself increasingly drawn to the mysterious patient in room 512. Unlike other VIPs who demanded special treatment, Frank rarely spoke, observing the hospital routine with guarded eyes that missed nothing, eyes that sometimes followed her with an intensity that should have been unsettling but somehow wasn't. "His kidneys are failing beyond what dialysis can manage," Dr. Patel explained during rounds, his voice lowered despite the private room. "Without a transplant within the next month, his prognosis is grave. Unfortunately, finding a compatible donor with his rare blood type will be challenging." The words echoed in Valerie's mind long after her shift ended, following her home to her modest apartment overlooking the city park. She sat by her window, watching autumn leaves dance across the sidewalk while memories of her father's final days surfaced unbidden. The helpless waiting, the hope that faded with each passing day. 3 nights later, Valerie made her decision. The compatibility test results confirmed what some inexplicable intuition had already whispered to her. Her kidney could save Frank Castellini's life. Without telling anyone, she submitted the paperwork for anonymous donation, knowing that hospital protocol would keep her identity concealed. Dr. Patel's surprise was evident when the compatible donor appeared in the system. "This is remarkable," he said during their meeting, peering at Valerie over his glasses with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal concern. "An anonymous donor with a perfect match. It's almost miraculous considering the circumstances." The day before surgery, Valerie stood silently outside Frank's room, watching as a distinguished older man with silver hair leaned close to whisper something that made Frank's normally impassive face harden with resolve. The visitor noticed her presence, nodding slightly before departing with a protective contingent of suits. Like guards, Valerie realized with a sudden chill. Surgery day arrived with a brilliant sunrise that painted the hospital windows in shades of gold and amber. Valerie surrendered herself to the care of her colleagues, closing her eyes as anesthesia pulled her gently under, never imagining how completely this sacrifice would transform her life in the days to come. Frank Castellini awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of pain, managed rather than dominating, the steady beep of monitors confirming he had survived. The hazy figure of his consigliere, Gino, materialized beside the bed, ancient eyes creased with relief in his weathered face. "The operation was successful, boss," Gino murmured, his loyalty evident in the way he maintained a protective vigil. "The doctor says the kidney is functioning perfectly, a miracle match from an anonymous donor who came forward just in time." Frank's empire stretched across the city like an invisible web. Restaurants, construction companies, shipping interests, all legitimate on paper, but built upon foundations laid by his grandfather during Prohibition. For 30 years, Frank had ruled this domain with calculated precision and controlled violence when necessary. The diagnosis had come like a betrayal from within, his body failing despite his power, his wealth, his carefully constructed fortress of influence. Death had never frightened Frank, but the vulnerability of illness had revealed something unexpected. The hollowness of an empire with no heir, no legacy beyond fear and obedience. During recovery, Frank observed the hospital staff with the same analytical detachment he applied to business negotiations. Most avoided direct eye contact, efficient but distant, except for one, a nurse with auburn hair who looked at him as if seeing a man rather than a reputation, her compassion neither forced nor fearful. Nurse Bennett, as her badge identified her, checked his vitals with gentle efficiency, her fingers cool against his wrist as she monitored his pulse. "The new kidney is adapting well," she explained, making notes in his chart. "You're healing faster than expected, Mr. Castellini." She brought natural light into the sterile room by opening blinds each morning, placing a small vase of changing seasonal flowers on his windowsill without comment or expectation. These small gestures confused Frank, accustomed as he was to interactions based on transaction or intimidation. One evening, as she adjusted his medication, Frank noticed faint surgical dressings peeking from beneath her uniform sleeve. A suspicion formed, impossible yet persistent, growing stronger when he observed her wincing slightly as she reached across his bed to check his IV line. "You should be resting rather than working," he commented, his voice still rough from intubation. "Recent surgery requires proper recovery time, something I'm learning firsthand." Her eyes widened momentarily before professional composure returned, her smile revealing nothing. "Everyone here works hard, Mr. Castellini," she replied with practiced deflection. "Some of our best doctors perform surgeries with arthritis in their hands. We're all a bit stubborn about taking care of others before ourselves." Frank instructed Gino to investigate quietly, calling upon hospital connections cultivated through years of strategic donations. The information arrived within hours, confirmation that changed everything. Nurse Valerie Bennett had donated her kidney anonymously, the perfect match that had saved his life. That night, Frank stared at the ceiling, confronting an unfamiliar emotion that might be gratitude or perhaps debt, both equally foreign to a man who had spent his life ensuring others remained indebted to him. Someone had given him life without expectation, without knowing his identity, without fear or favor, a concept so alien it left him deeply unsettled. When discharged, Frank left without speaking to Valerie, but his influence remained. An envelope containing hospital board approval for the dedicated transplant recovery garden she had proposed months earlier, funded by an anonymous donor whose identity she would eventually discover. "Keep eyes on her," Frank instructed Gino as they drove away from the hospital, the city skyline rising before them like a concrete promise. "Discreetly, I want to know everything about the woman who saved my life without knowing whose life she was saving." Valerie returned to work 2 weeks after her surgery, her body still adjusting to its new reality, but her spirit lightened by the knowledge of what she had done. The transplant recovery garden was progressing rapidly, workers appearing seemingly overnight to transform the neglected hospital courtyard into something beautiful and healing. Her colleagues whispered about the mysterious benefactor who had suddenly funded the project she had championed for years. Dr. Patel watched her with knowing eyes but respected her privacy, understanding intuitively that her decision had been deeply personal rather than professional. The first unusual delivery arrived on a Tuesday, a handcrafted wooden bench for the garden, its brass plaque bearing only the inscription, "For those who give without expectation of return." Valerie traced the engraved words with her fingertips, recognizing a message meant only for her. Frank monitored her recovery through reports and occasional photographs, learning about her volunteer work with kidney patients, her modest apartment filled with books and plants, her solitary life shaped by dedication rather than loneliness. The more he discovered, the more his curiosity deepened into something dangerously close to admiration. "She volunteers at the children's ward on weekends," Gino reported during their weekly briefing at Frank's penthouse overlooking the city. "Lives within her means, no debt except student loans, no romantic entanglements. Her colleagues say she's married to her work." 6 weeks after the transplant, Frank made his first public appearance, a charity gala benefiting the hospital's nephrology department. He arrived late, commanding attention without effort, wealth evident in every detail from his tailored tuxedo to the security detail that shadowed his movements. Valerie stood near a display of the garden plans, explaining the therapeutic benefits to potential donors, when conversation around her suddenly quieted. She turned to find Frank Castellini approaching, his recovery evident in his confident stride and restored vitality. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, recognition flowing between them like an electric current. Frank moved toward her with deliberate purpose, the crowd parting instinctively before him, while Valerie remained rooted in place by shock and something inexplicably like destiny. "Mr. Castellini," she acknowledged when he reached her, professional composure masking her racing heart. "It's wonderful to see you looking so well after your procedure." Frank studied her face with the intensity that had made business rivals crumble, searching for any sign of fear or manipulation, and finding none. "The garden project," he said, gesturing toward the architectural renderings displayed behind her. "It's impressive, a place of healing for both donors and recipients." The conversation flowed with surprising ease, moving from medical topics to philosophy of care, neither acknowledging the invisible thread connecting them. Other guests watched with curious speculation, wondering what connected the notorious businessman to the modest nurse who seemed entirely comfortable in his formidable presence. As evening progressed, Frank maintained a respectable distance while keeping Valerie in his sightline, observing how she interacted with patients and colleagues, genuine, compassionate, without artifice or agenda. Her authenticity fascinated him, a quality absent in his world of calculated moves and strategic relationships. "Dance with me," he requested later, approaching her on the terrace where she had stepped out for a moment of quiet. The request held no command despite his habitual authority, leaving space for her refusal in a way he rarely allowed himself with others. Valerie hesitated, weighing professional boundaries against the undeniable connection between them. "One dance," she agreed finally, placing her hand in his extended one. "Though I should warn you that years of hospital rounds haven't improved my dancing skills." They moved together with unexpected harmony, Frank leading with the confident precision that characterized all his movements. Valerie followed intuitively, her medical training giving her an awareness of balance and rhythm that translated surprisingly well to the dance floor. "You know, don't you?" she asked softly as they circled the floor, other dancers giving them a respectful berth. "About the donation." Frank's hand tightened slightly at her waist, his expression revealing nothing to onlookers, but his eyes acknowledging everything to her. "I make it my business to know things, especially when they concern my life," he responded, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "The question is why, Valerie?" The string quartet transitioned to a slower melody, giving them reason to draw closer without raising eyebrows. "Not for recognition or gratitude," she answered honestly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I've seen too many people wait for matching donors that never come. I couldn't stand by when I could help." As the music ended, Frank retained her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Join me for dinner tomorrow evening," he said, somewhere between request and command. "There's a restaurant overlooking the harbor. My driver will collect you at 7. The invitation sent ripples of concern through the hospital administration when Valerie mentioned needing to adjust her shift. "Be careful, Valerie," Dr. Patel warned during their brief conversation in his office. Frank Castellini moves in dangerous circles. His business interests aren't always as legitimate as this hospital wing he funded. Valerie wore a simple emerald dress that evening, elegant without ostentation, her hair loose around her shoulders for the first time since Frank had known her. The restaurant had been cleared of other patrons, a privacy measure that spoke volumes about his position and power. Candlelight softened the sharp angles of Frank's face as they dined on exquisite seafood and discussed everything except the obvious, their shared connection through the transplant. He spoke instead of his childhood in the old neighborhood, his grandfather's immigration story, carefully edited versions of his rise to prominence. "You've researched me," he observed halfway through the meal, noticing how she navigated around certain topics. "Found the newspaper articles, the police reports, the rumors." Valerie set down her wineglass, honesty her only possible response. "Yes, enough to know your reputation, though news reports rarely capture the full truth of anyone's life," she said, watching his reaction carefully. "I'm curious about the man who received my kidney, not the legend others have created." A real smile transformed Frank's face momentarily, erasing the calculation that usually resided there. "Most people either fear me too much to ask direct questions or are too eager to please to risk honesty," he admitted, reaching across to refill her glass. "Your directness is refreshing." Their evening extended past midnight, conversation flowing more easily than either had expected. Valerie found herself laughing at Frank's dry observations about city politics, while he listened with genuine interest to her stories of patient recoveries and hospital challenges. When his driver returned her home, Frank walked her to her door with old-world courtesy. "I'd like to show you something tomorrow," he said, his usual commanding tone softened to something almost vulnerable. "If you're willing, my driver will bring you to the address at noon." The address led to a stately brownstone on the city's most exclusive street, its understated elegance a stark contrast to the flashy penthouses Valerie had imagined. Inside, Frank waited in a sunlit conservatory filled with rare orchids and tropical plants, a hidden garden in the heart of the concrete city. "My mother's passion," he explained, gesturing to the meticulously maintained collection. "She believed beauty should be preserved, especially in places where it struggles to survive naturally." Frank led her through the house to a private library where an elderly gentleman waited, medical credentials displayed prominently on the wall behind him. "This is Dr. Rossini, my personal physician," Frank introduced. "He'd like to examine you, with your permission, to ensure your recovery is progressing properly." The examination revealed no complications, but Dr. Rossini's frown indicated professional disapproval. "You've returned to full nursing duties too quickly," he admonished, putting away his stethoscope with practiced precision. "The body needs proper time to adjust after such a significant procedure." Frank remained silent during the consultation, but his decision had already formed. "I'm establishing a private recovery facility at my estate outside the city," he announced once they were alone again, brooking no argument. "I'd like you to oversee it, starting with your own recovery." Valerie's instinct was immediate refusal, professional boundaries and personal caution raising alarm bells. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Castellini, but I have responsibilities at the hospital, patients who rely on me," she countered, straightening her posture despite the lingering soreness in her side. The hardness returned to Frank's expression, the businessman replacing the almost friend from dinner. "The hospital board has already approved your paid leave. They're quite accommodating to major donors," he stated, his tone making clear this wasn't truly a request. "My driver will collect your personal items this afternoon." The estate sprawled across 30 acres of landscaped grounds, separated from the city by both distance and an imposing security system. Valerie found herself installed in a guest suite larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soothing blues and creams that somehow matched her personal aesthetic perfectly. "This will be your private wing," explained Gloria, the housekeeper who had worked for the Castellini family for 3 decades. "Mr. Frank has instructed that you're to have complete freedom of the house and grounds, though some areas require special access." Days slipped into a strangely peaceful routine, mornings spent reviewing medical journals in the sunroom, afternoons walking the extensive gardens, evenings often sharing quiet dinners with Frank when his business allowed. The promised medical facility materialized in the East Wing, equipment arriving daily under Valerie's expert supervision. Valerie noticed the constant presence of security personnel, discreet but vigilant shadows that monitored the perimeter and screened all visitors with military precision. Their presence confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Her role here went beyond professional consultation or Frank's concern for her recovery. On her 10th evening, Frank received visitors that disrupted their emerging pattern, 3 men whose expensive suits couldn't disguise the dangerous energy they carried. Valerie retreated to her suite as requested, but curiosity drew her to the balcony overlooking the main entrance when raised voices carried through the night air. "You bring unnecessary attention with these hospital donations and charity appearances," one visitor argued, his accent thick with old country cadences. "The old agreements require discretion, Franco, not newspaper photographs with society doctors." Another voice joined in, lower but equally intense. "And this nurse, bringing her here raises questions about your judgment," the man continued with barely concealed disapproval. "The families are watching, wondering if your illness has weakened your resolve." Frank's response came with the quiet intensity that Valerie had learned was more dangerous than shouting. "My judgment and resolve remain entirely intact, as you'll discover if you continue questioning either," he stated, the threat unmistakable beneath his controlled tone. "The agreements will be honored, but my personal affairs are not subject to committee approval." After the visitors departed, Valerie found Frank in his study, tension evident in the set of his shoulders as he stared into the fireplace. "I should leave," she said from the doorway, making him turn sharply. "Whatever protection you think I need, it's creating complications for you." Frank crossed the room with surprising speed, stopping just short of touching her. "You gave me life without knowing who I was," he said, vulnerability briefly visible beneath his controlled exterior. "Now I'm protecting yours because I know exactly who's threatening it." The revelation came in careful stages that night. Rival families interpreting Frank's illness and subsequent recovery as signs of weakness, investigations that had uncovered the anonymous donation, threats against the unknown donor who now represented Frank's potential vulnerability. Valerie listened with growing horror to the danger she had inadvertently entered. "The private medical facility isn't just for show," Frank explained, pouring them both a measure of aged whiskey. "It's a legitimate enterprise, but also your cover story. A professional reason for your presence here that doesn't reveal your true connection to me." Valerie accepted the glass but didn't drink, her mind racing through implications and possibilities. "So I'm essentially in protective custody," she concluded, meeting his gaze directly. "How long do you anticipate this arrangement continuing?" "Until I've neutralized the threat," Frank answered, with the calm certainty of a man accustomed to removing obstacles. "My resources are substantial, but dismantling these particular challenges requires delicate handling to avoid larger conflicts." Winter descended on the estate, transforming the gardens into crystalline sculptures that Valerie admired from the warmth of the conservatory. Her medical facility became operational, treating a carefully selected clientele of wealthy patients whose discretion was guaranteed through various means Valerie chose not to examine too closely. Frank's business increasingly called him away, sometimes for days at a time, leaving Valerie to wonder about the nature of these absences. During one such period, her professional curiosity and growing personal concern led her to his private study, a boundary she had carefully observed until now. The door yielded unexpectedly to her touch, revealing the immaculate space where Frank conducted the business he kept separate from his other enterprises. Medical records were arranged precisely on his desk. Her records, complete with donation documentation she had believed was protected by hospital confidentiality protocols. Beside them lay surveillance photographs. Valerie entering her apartment building, working at the hospital, visiting her mother's grave on the anniversary of her death. The timeline revealed monitoring that predated her donation, raising questions that sent ice through her veins despite the room's warmth. Valerie was replacing the folders exactly as she'd found them, when a subtle change in air pressure alerted her to another presence. She turned to find Gino watching from the doorway, his ancient eyes revealing neither surprise nor judgment at her discovery. "He's known about you for years," the old man said quietly, entering the room and carefully closing the door behind him. "Since you treated his nephew after that unfortunate hunting accident, the boy who wasn't supposed to be identified." Memories clicked into place. A teenage patient 3 years earlier, gunshot wound explained as a hunting accident. The unusual security and midnight discharge to private care. "That was Frank's nephew?" she asked, pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves in her mind. Gino nodded, his loyalty to Frank evident even as he revealed truths his boss had concealed. "You kept his identity confidential despite pressure from police, protected his privacy when reporters came asking questions," he explained, his weathered hands smoothing the folder she had disturbed. "The boss never forgets those who honor the old codes, even unknowingly." The revelation that Frank had known of her long before his illness transformed everything Valerie had believed about their connection. "My donation wasn't random chance," she concluded, anger rising at the manipulation. "He orchestrated everything. My compatibility testing, the anonymous submission, all of it." When Frank returned that evening, Valerie confronted him in the garden pavilion, where they often shared after-dinner conversations. "You used me," she stated without preamble, winter moonlight illuminating the hurt and betrayal in her eyes. "Manipulated me into becoming your donor without my informed consent." Frank's expression remained impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes. Perhaps regret, though Valerie couldn't be certain. "I had you tested for compatibility when you treated Carlo, yes," he admitted without apology. "But the decision to donate was entirely yours. I simply ensured the match would be discovered when needed." "Why not ask directly?" Valerie demanded, pacing the small space, her breath creating clouds in the cold night air. "You could have approached me honestly, explained the situation. I'm a medical professional. I understand the urgency of transplant needs." Frank's laugh held no humor as he watched her movements. "And would you have agreed had you known the kidney was for Frank Castellini, rumored crime boss and destroyer of lives?" he questioned, his voice carrying the edge that reminded her of exactly who he was. "Your professional ethics might have permitted it, but your personal integrity would have struggled with the decision." The truth hung between them like frost, beautiful and dangerous in its crystalline clarity. "I need to return to my life," Valerie said finally, wrapping her arms around herself, against both the cold and the realization of her position. Whatever danger exists, I can't remain here under false pretenses. Frank's expression hardened, the businessman replacing the almost friend she had glimpsed in their private conversations. The threat remains active. 3 attempts have been intercepted since you've been here, he stated with clinical detachment. Your departure now would guarantee they succeed within days. Evidence appeared on her breakfast tray the next morning. Surveillance photos, intercepted communications, police reports filed under different names, but describing the same pattern of calculated threats. Valerie reviewed them with growing horror, her medical training allowing her to understand exactly what such attacks would mean physically. 6 weeks, Frank proposed, when he found her still reviewing the documents that afternoon. Give me 6 weeks to resolve these particular threats. Then you're free to choose. Stay or go. With full knowledge of who I am and what that means, Valerie studied his face, searching for manipulation or deception, and finding only the direct assessment of a man accustomed to calculating odds and acceptable losses. 6 weeks, she agreed finally, but with complete honesty between us moving forward. I want to know what I've truly become part of. The agreement transformed their relationship into an uneasy alliance, built on promised honesty. Frank granted Valerie access to parts of his world previously hidden, introductions to family members who viewed her with cautious curiosity, attendance at legitimate business meetings where her medical expertise provided genuine value. Snow blanketed the estate grounds, creating an illusion of peaceful isolation that belied the mounting tensions Frank navigated daily. Valerie observed the subtle shift in security protocols, additional personnel stationed at the perimeter, communication systems upgraded, weapons more visibly carried by those closest to the house. 3 weeks into their agreement, the first direct attack came during a medical supply delivery, 2 men posing as transport workers who never made it past the front gate. Frank dismissed the incident with practiced nonchalance, but Valerie noticed how his security detail doubled afterward, their vigilance heightening to near-paranoid levels. The Navarro family is growing impatient, Gino informed them during a private dinner, his weathered face grave as he delivered the intelligence. They believe targeting the nurse will force you to negotiate territorial concessions from a position of weakness. Frank's response was a single phone call, made in Valerie's presence with deliberate transparency. Arrange a meeting with Enrique Navarro. Neutral ground, standard protocols, he instructed, eyes never leaving Valerie's face as he added, and ensure our medical facility is prepared for potential emergencies afterward. The night before the meeting, Valerie found Frank in the conservatory, contemplating his mother's orchids with unusual stillness. These negotiations rarely end without bloodshed, he acknowledged when she joined him, honesty replacing his usual calculated responses. Tomorrow will likely change everything. Dawn arrived with unexpected developments, Gino appearing at breakfast with news that the Navarro heir had been arrested overnight in an FBI raid, evidence of international trafficking charges mysteriously provided to federal authorities. The older man's significant glance toward Frank confirmed Valerie's suspicion about the convenient timing. A temporary solution, Frank admitted when they were alone, his expression both satisfied and wary. It buys us time, but creates complications with other families who will question my involvement in federal attention to our shared interests. Valerie's medical facility received its first emergency patient that evening, not from rival families as feared, but one of Frank's own lieutenants, Gregory, wounded in what was described as a misunderstanding during a business negotiation. Her surgical training proved invaluable as she extracted the bullet lodged dangerously close to his spine. "You saved my most valuable soldier," Frank acknowledged, watching from the doorway as Valerie monitored Gregory's vitals following the procedure. "He's been loyal since we were children, one of the few people I trust without reservation." Gregory's recovery became Valerie's primary focus, providing professional distance from the escalating tensions surrounding Frank's business empire. The wounded man's gradual healing seemed to mirror something changing within Frank himself, a softening, almost imperceptible to others, but increasingly evident to Valerie in their private moments. 5 weeks into their agreement, as winter began yielding reluctantly to early spring, the final challenge arrived without warning or subtlety, a black sedan breaching the outer perimeter during a scheduled security shift change, 3 armed men making it halfway to the main house before the alarm sounded. The gunfire that followed shattered the estate's cultivated peace, forcing Valerie to confront the violent reality of Frank's world that no amount of honest conversation could fully prepare her for. Frank's security neutralized the threat efficiently, but the message was clear. Someone had insider knowledge of the estate's protocols. "We have a traitor," Gino concluded during the emergency meeting that followed, his ancient eyes scanning those gathered in Frank's study with newfound suspicion. "Someone close is feeding information to our enemies." Valerie treated minor injuries sustained during the confrontation, her medical training providing calm purpose amid the chaos of accusations and heightened paranoia. Through it all, she observed Frank's leadership. Controlled fury balanced by strategic thinking, loyalty rewarded with protection, betrayal marked for eventual retribution. The investigation narrowed to 3 possibilities: longtime associates whose recent behavior raised questions. Frank conducted the interrogations personally, methods Valerie chose not to witness, but whose results she could read in his eyes when he returned to her. Darker, colder, reminiscent of the man she had first encountered, rather than the one she had come to know. "The family council has been called," Frank informed her the following evening, his voice carrying the weight of generations of tradition. "My leadership is being questioned, not just because of my illness, but because of you." The council convened in the estate's formal dining room, 5 elderly men representing the original families who had formed alliances during Prohibition. Valerie remained upstairs as requested, but the house carried sound in unexpected ways, allowing her to hear portions of the heated discussion below. "Your judgment is compromised by this woman," accused a voice thick with cigar smoke and authority. "First you bring her into the sanctuary of your home, then you disrupt federal investigations to protect her. Now you spill family blood over an outsider." Frank's response came with the deadly quiet that Valerie had learned preceded his most dangerous decisions. "The woman who saved my life has earned my protection," he stated without apology or justification. "Anyone who targets her declares themselves my enemy. This is non-negotiable." The ultimatum delivered by the council reached Valerie through Gino. Frank must choose between his position as head of the family business and his relationship with the nurse who had become a liability to their collective interests. The old man delivered the message with genuine regret, his loyalty to Frank evident even as he fulfilled his duty to the council. Frank found Valerie packing her few belongings when he entered her suite after the council departed. "You don't need to leave," he said from the doorway, his customary authority absent from his voice. "I can protect you regardless of their decision." Valerie continued folding clothing with methodical precision, her mind made up during the long hours of the council meeting. "I won't be the reason you lose everything you've built," she replied, finally meeting his gaze directly. "My presence has already cost you too much." Something shifted in Frank's expression, a decision forming behind eyes that had calculated countless risks and benefits throughout his career. "What if I'm willing to lose it?" he asked quietly, entering the room fully and closing the door behind him. "What if there are things more valuable than power or tradition?" The question hung between them, challenging everything Valerie had come to believe about the man who had first been her patient, then her protector, and now something undefined that made her heart race in a way unrelated to fear. "You don't mean that," she countered, though uncertainty colored her voice. "Your whole life has been dedicated to the family business." Frank moved closer, stopping just short of touching her. "My grandfather built this empire so his children could have better lives, not become prisoners to it," he stated with surprising gentleness. "Perhaps I've forgotten that purpose until now. Until you reminded me that life itself is the most valuable possession." Dawn found them both in the library, finalizing details of an audacious plan that would either secure their future or destroy everything. "The evidence is comprehensive," Frank explained, showing Valerie documents carefully preserved for decades. "Enough to grant immunity in exchange for testimony against larger targets the authorities have pursued for generations." Valerie studied the extensive files with growing amazement, recognizing their value not just to law enforcement, but as Frank's insurance policy against betrayal. "You've been preparing this exit strategy for years," she realized, understanding the depth of his foresight. "Long before you met me." Frank's smile held a hint of his strategic brilliance. "My father believed in contingencies. He taught me to create escape routes before entering any room," he acknowledged, carefully returning the documents to their hidden safe. "I simply never had sufficient reason to use this particular door until now." The FBI agent who arrived at the prearranged location was appropriately skeptical of Frank's sudden cooperation. 20 years we've tried to turn someone from your organization," she remarked, reviewing the sample documents Frank provided. "Why now, Castellini?" Frank's response was both truth and calculated misdirection. "Health crises provide clarity about legacy," he stated simply, offering no explanation about Valerie's role in his decision. "My testimony comes with non-negotiable conditions: complete immunity for myself and specified associates, new identities, and relocation overseas. The negotiations lasted weeks, during which Valerie returned to her apartment and hospital position under discreet federal protection. The separation proved more difficult than she had anticipated, her life resuming its familiar patterns while feeling fundamentally changed by her time with Frank. Spring transformed the hospital's transplant recovery garden into a sanctuary of new growth, vibrant flowers replacing winter's empty beds. Valerie found herself drawn there during breaks, remembering how this project had once represented her professional passion before life had expanded to include possibilities she never imagined. The newspaper headlines broke on a Monday morning. Major indictments across 5 crime families, federal raids coordinated across 3 states, decades of organized criminal enterprises dismantled in a single day. Frank Castellini's name was conspicuously absent from all public reports, his disappearance noted only in business circles when his legitimate holdings were quietly transferred to new ownership. 3 months passed with no communication, Valerie eventually accepting that Frank's protection extended to complete separation, keeping her uninvolved and therefore safe from potential retaliation. She focused on her patients, expanded the recovery garden's programs, and tried to convince herself that the extraordinary interlude had been just that, a temporary deviation from her normal life. The letter arrived on her birthday, delivered by courier with no return address. Inside, coordinates and a date 2 weeks hence, nothing more. Against all reasonable judgment, Valerie requested vacation time and boarded a flight to Sicily, following the mysterious invitation with equal parts hope and trepidation. The Mediterranean villa stood isolated on a hillside overlooking the azure sea, surrounded by olive groves and flowering gardens that reminded Valerie of Frank's mother's conservatory. She followed the stone path to the main entrance, heart racing as the heavy wooden door swung open before she could knock. Frank stood framed in the doorway, Mediterranean sun having softened his appearance, casual linen replacing tailored suits, his expression more relaxed than she had ever seen it. "You came," he said simply, neither question nor statement, but something between wonder and certainty. "I needed to see for myself," Valerie replied, taking in the peaceful surroundings so different from the fortified estate she had known. "That you found your way out, that you're really free." Frank led her through the villa to a terrace overlooking a garden in progress, newly planted trees and shrubs arranged around a central fountain, workers carefully placing stones for a walking path that would eventually wind through the developing landscape. "It's not complete yet," he explained, something like uncertainty coloring his voice. "But I'm hoping you might help design the rest, perhaps a recovery garden similar to the one you created." The invitation behind his words remained unspoken, but clear in his eyes, not just to help with the garden, but to share the new life he was building. Valerie stepped closer, the decision she had made during the long flight finally crystallizing into certainty. "I'd like that," she answered, reaching for his hand. "A new garden for a new beginning." Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content here.